Well, as you can tell by the title of this video, if you're watching it the day that I am uploading it, Wednesday, November 16th, then you are aware that it is my birthday today, my 26th birthday. I just wanted to talk about 26 books that I love for my 26th birthday. I was going back and forth with this idea for a while, but there are just so many books that I love that I don't get to talk a lot about because they just don't fit in a lot of my normal content. I don't normally get to make a lot of videos that would like feature them at all, and I just wanted to highlight for my 26 years of being on this earth here, 26 books that I've loved over the course of my years. So I have a big mix of books. I have fantasy, I have YA, I have memoirs, I of course have lots of romances, I have contemporary, I have fan fiction. I got a whole mix of stuff here. So how I made this list was I literally sat in my bedroom here before I moved these books in here to save space on my shelves out there. I sat away from all of my bookshelves and I just sat down with a sheet and I was like, what are 26 books that I love? And just did them straight from memory. So these are not like my 26 all-time favorite books. Like this is not an all-time list. It's just off the top of my head, what were 26 books that I could think of that I loved? And ones that I've loved earlier on in my life, like as a teenager, what I loved kind of like in my early 20s, what I love now in my I'm into my late 20s, which is just wild. I somehow simultaneously feel so much older than 26, where at the same time I feel like, how am I allowed to make like adult decisions? It's just a bizarre state. But first, actually, I want to highlight my t-shirt. Look at it, it's my babies on a little t-shirt. Nikki from Nikki and Bookland sent this to me for my birthday, and it's just truly one of the most special things. It's so freaking cute. Anyways, okay. 26 books I love. Let's go. And also these are in no particular order either. So I just have them stacked up here and we're just gonna go one by one off the stacks. So first up, After by Anna Todd. I freaking owe this book so much. Honestly, this is what got me into reading romance. So I used to work at Family Video and I remember we got the After movie in there and we could do these things called pre-streets where when we got the movies in, we got them in like the week before they were like on the street and we were able to take them home and watch them before we put them out on the shelves for everyone to rent. And After came through and I was like, oh, that sounds kind of good. Like I'll take it home, watch it, whatever. And then I saw on that it was like based on a book and I was like, oh, okay. I didn't read a lot then still. I was like trying to get back into reading a little bit, but wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. So I checked out After from my library and I was like, what is this? What is this? I need more of this. And I devoured the rest of the series after that. I think I read it like almost twice in a row. Like I think I finished the series and like went back and reread it again. I've now read this whole series 3 times and I'm going to be reading it for a 4th time because Cheyenne, Nikki, and I are doing an After read along. And truly I just owe like my entire love of romance to this series. Like I didn't know that anything like this existed. I truly didn't know that there was like a whole romance genre around like people in college in their early 20s. Like I genuinely thought that romances were only like historical romances or like Nora Roberts, like the romances that my grandma read, like clean romance. Like I didn't know that there was an entire world like this. So it really was my like unlocking in my brain and I love it. I love the toxic energy. Hate on it all you want. But without this, I wouldn't have like a YouTube channel or read or have any of like my friends that are now in my life or anything. Next up, I have one of the memoirs that I have on here. So I read this back in high school, A Stolen Life by J.C. Dugard. So I took a couple of like forensic science classes in high school and we all got to choose like a crime case to cover and like make a presentation on, and I did J.C. Dugard's kidnapping, and then obviously like I had read this already before I did that report, so that's why I was like, I loved this book so much I want to do a report on it. But I've read this book a couple times now over my life and I just I truly cannot fathom anything about her situation. Like it's truly just absolutely insane and she is so incredibly strong to have gone through what she's gone through and to come out and write not only one book about it but also her book of firsts and like just all the things that she's experienced since she's been out. So if you don't know, J.C. Dugard was kidnapped when she was, how old was she? In 4th or 5th grade, maybe? I think maybe 5th grade or something. And she was kidnapped and she was held captive for 18 years. It's absolutely wild. This book is heartbreaking, but so good. And one of my like favorite autobiographies ever. It's just, I loved it. Next up, I have Birthday Girl here. So if After was what got me into romance or like opened my eyes to the romance genre, this is what opened my eyes to indie romances. So Birthday Girl by Penelope Douglas. Obviously, Penelope Douglas is my favorite author, so y'all know that something was gonna be on here of theirs, but Birthday Girl in particular is my favorite standalone. Okay, so I had seen people talking about this on YouTube, and I put it off for the longest time because I didn't used to buy books. I never bought books. I bought the After series and I was like, oh, okay, I need to kind of like cool it down a little bit. I don't need to be buying any more books. But Birthday Girl, obviously being independently published, my library didn't have it. And I finally got to the point where I'm like, I want to read this book so freaking bad that I'm going to spend like the $16, $17, whatever to buy it. And when I bought it, I was like, once again, it was like my mind blew. And I was like, what is this whole world of like taboo, forbidden romances? And truly, so this was like another gateway for me. It's an ex-boyfriend's dad, age gap, slow burn romance. And I fell in love with Penelope Douglas's writing from this book as well. And that opened like a whole new portal. And soon after this was when I bought a Kindle because I was like, oh, I need to read more of these books, but like, I don't want to keep spending like money for the paperbacks. And now look like where I am now. But back at the time, it was very revolutionary for me. And I haven't reread this book since I read it for the first time. I think because I'm kind of scared too, because I'm like, what if I don't get that same feeling that I got when I first read it? But actually, I am taking the day off of work, the day that this video is going up, for my birthday, just because, I don't know, I'm just taking it off. And I think I might actually reread Birthday Girl on my actual birthday. Just see if it gives me the same vibes. But yeah. Next up, Divergent by Veronica Roth. I love Veronica Roth. I'm a Veronica Roth stan till the day I die, and I will defend her about this series forever and ever and ever. So I did not even read these until I was in college, actually. I bought the box set after I had read them from my library. Again, I didn't used to really buy books a lot, but I was like, I gotta own these after I read this whole series. So I'm gonna spoil the end of this series. It has literally been out for what, like 10 years or something. So if you don't want to know the spoiler for the end of this series, then like you can skip past this. But our main character, Triss, in this book ends up dying in Allegiant. And I think this series is where my like love for tragic character arcs and I love tragic romances now, but like seeing 4 deal with the aftermath of Triss's passing, like I think this series is kind of to like blame for that. Like I love that. I eat it up. And I think because of the way that Allegiant rocked me, it like I was a mess after reading that, and I just love this series so much. I always like YA fantasy. I don't read a lot of it now anymore, but like truly it will always hold like a very special place in my heart. I do really love it. I used to like exclusively read that, and I always loved the Divergent series. I loved Triss. I loved character death. Veronica Roth is really, really great at doing purposeful character death, and not many authors I feel like nail that, but she really does. Next up, I have another Mystic Box cover, and that is Kill Switch by Penelope Douglas. So yet again, yes, another book by Penelope Douglas, but this is the 3rd book in the Devil's Night series. In this book specifically, there is something about Damon's character that Penelope Douglas did so well with, is the fact that in Corrupt and Hideaway, well, in Corrupt specifically, I hated Damon more than like any other character I've ever hated. Like I loathed this dude. And then in Hideaway, I still hated him, but I was starting to kind of see like maybe he does have a redeeming factor, but still like I don't fuck with this dude. And then in Kill Switch, I was completely flipped. And I was like, I would do anything to protect this character. And I just, there's nothing that I love more than morally gray characters. I've always loved morally gray characters. Since I was little, I always loved the villains and things. And now I definitely see that reflected in my reading taste, that I always lean towards like villains, morally gray characters in books, even when I'm not necessarily supposed to. But in this one, you are supposed to. And I just loved Damon's journey. This was also one of my first dark romances that I ever read. And again, just kind of like opened my eyes to like the dark romance world. And I can just like accredit so many things again to this series, like the Devil's Night series in general. And I love this book. I love Damon and Winter's relationship. I love heroes that hate everyone but the heroine. Next up is actually a recent read of mine, but I was like blown away by this book. And then I just saw the trailer, or like the first kind of look at I think it's a show, and I am so excited. And that is Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. So this book it's a contemporary. It's not like a romance or anything, but it follows Daisy Jones, who's a singer, and the Six, who's a band. And it's them like both coming together to be Daisy Jones and the Six. And it just shows all of the band dynamics, the dynamic between Billy, who's like the leader of the Six, who's the main singer of them, and Daisy, and like how their like love-hate relationship with each other. But yeah, I don't really want to get into any spoilers or anything with it, but I just love this book. I loved the formatting. I love how it's told in like interview style format. I love how we see them over the course of like their entire career. It just felt very like raw, like you felt like you were right there with them. I love the dynamic of seeing like someone saying like, this is what happened, and then the next sentence is like, this is how it happened. And you're kind of deciding like which version of events you kind of like align with, because you don't actually know what the truth is. No one knows what the truth is of everything that happened between them, because it's just all up to people's interpretation of events. It's so good. I loved it, and I loved how Taylor Jenkins Reid told the story. Next up, I have Empire of Storms by Sarah J. Maas. So this is, I mean, if you can't tell, this is the 5th book in the Throne of Glass series, and it is my favorite book in that entire series. This book literally is like perfection. Like, I have not a single complaint to say about this entire book. It, obviously I can't say anything plot-wise because it's the 5th book, but it follows so many characters, so many storylines, and this is one rare book where when I got to someone's chapter POV, I never was like, oh, I don't feel like being with them. You know, I feel like in fantasy books, when you get to some people's POVs, you're like, I don't really feel like reading about them. No, never once in this entire book was I ever like, I don't want to be with this person. Like, all of their storylines are so interesting. We see so many converging of storylines in this book, and it's handled so well. It makes you like smile. It like broke my heart at certain times. I cried at certain times. The battle scenes are amazing. Like, the characters are amazing. I don't even know what else to say. Truly, this book, I just love it so much. I've obviously read it twice, and this is like an insanely thick book, so the fact that I read it like word for word, page for page twice should tell you something about how amazing it is that I like had that dedication to do it. And you know what? I'll read it a 3rd time in the future. Next, The Love Hypothesis by Allie Hazelwood. So this book is a Raylo fanfiction turned into a published novel. So that is the reason why it piqued my interest, because normally, y'all know, I don't really read traditionally published books. But this one I had to, because it's Raylo, and I am a Raylo stan. But this one, it's a student teacher or student professor, college, academic romance, fake dating romance. It's just so cute. I genuinely love this. Like, I don't really love like lighter contemporaries either. Y'all just know that that's not typically like my taste, but this book just like defied all of that and was like, you know what, maybe it is your taste. It's not. But for this book specifically, I make an exception for all of that. It gave me like the Kylo and Rey happy ending that I was robbed of in Rise of Skywalker. Next up, The Mistake by Elle Kennedy. This is book 2 in the Off-Campus series. And this one is Logan and Grace's book. And I truly don't know how to explain what it is about this book that I just like love, because I love the Off-Campus series as a whole. Like, I enjoy all of the books. I gave all of them either 5 or 4 stars. But there is just something about Grace and Logan that I am just so drawn to. I truly cannot explain it, especially Logan in particular. I don't know what it is about Logan that I'm just like, I'm obsessed with you. And I love him and Grace's romance. I love how it starts and they're like kind of getting something going, and then he fucks up, and then she ends up going away, and then she comes back and he grovels, and he grovels so hard. And just like their dynamic together, I don't know. I don't know what it is about this book. Whenever I start it, I can't put it down. Like, I always end up reading it in one sitting, and it is like a shorter book. And again, I read this series very, very early on in like my finding romance journey. So again, I think that's kind of why it's just always held like a special place in my heart, is because it was early on. This was one of the first books that I was like obsessed with. Okay, next up, another memoir that I read last year that I think this was my top book of last year. Know My Name by Chanel Miller. So this one, I'm sure if you're like around my age or anything, you've heard about the Stanford University case with Brock Turner. She decided to stamp her name on it and say, this is Know My Name, this is my story, and told it all from her perspective. It was, this book just put me through like such a wide range of emotions. I was so angry reading it. I was frustrated reading it. I was heartbroken reading it. It's truly like, it's just so, it just truly is so wonderfully written. It was a very timely book as well. I mean, it's still timely now to be talking about it. But yeah, I just remember being like so utterly like moved reading it. And I don't read a lot of memoirs anymore. I'm like I don't know, because you know, I like to read for fun and read for escapism. But there was something about this one where I was like, I have to read it, and I'm so glad that I did, even though it obviously is very heavy. It's just incredible and so good, and I feel like everyone should read her story and just hear everything from her perspective, and everything that you don't think about in terms of like trial proceedings and everything. It was just so good. Next up, y'all knew this was gonna be on this list, Sweet Dandelion by Macaulay Smeltzer. This book, I love this book for so many reasons, but I think one of my favorite things is that it really showed me how much I love character-driven books. I've always been like a character-driven like movie watcher to like TV show watcher. Like I don't normally, obviously you need plot, but I've never been drawn to shows that are purely like plot-driven and not as much character-driven. That was my issue. I love Criminal Minds, but for a while that was my issue where I was like having where I wasn't enjoying it as much anymore, was because at the beginning it's very much just plot-driven and not as much of like the characters themselves. And I loved in that show how it started developing the characters more, and this showed me like that I am just really that bitch about characters. And it's just Dani's journey from healing from a school shooting that her mother was shot and killed in and she was shot and injured in, and it's her romance with her guidance counselor. I just love the slow burn of it. I love the mental health journey. I love how you really see Dani at the lowest of low and seeing her truly heal and grow. I'm always going to be drawn to mental health journeys and books, and this is, I think, one of like my favorite that I've ever read. I just love this book, and y'all know how much I love forbidden romances. And I mean, okay. Next up, we have Scythe by Neil Shusterman. So this one is another YA dystopian romance. So this one is in a world where no one dies anymore. There are these things called scythes, and they are people in society who glean people. And it's just random. They get to go and just glean people, and that is how they kind of control population. So you could like reset yourself and keep on resetting and resetting and resetting yourself for like 100, 150, 200 years, you know, whatever, until you are gleaned. And this one follows two teens who become apprentices to a scythe to become like an official scythe, and neither of them really want it, but it's kind of like, obviously then if you don't want to be a scythe, you're the one that like should be the scythe. And it's such a cool premise. I read this in college for a YA fiction class that I took, and this book was by far my favorite one that we read. The world was so freaking cool. The characters are cool. The whole entire series as a whole, like how it goes, and just like the politics of it all, the character's journey. It's just, I love this trilogy. The fourth book, like it's like short stories from history of the world, I just bought over the weekend, and I cannot wait to get to read it. Probably one of the last YA series that I've read that I've like truly loved. Next up, one of the newer books that made it on the list from this year that I read this year. This is not a new book in terms of like release date, but new to me, and that is Kiss the Sky by Krista and Becca Ritchie. So this is the first book in the Calloway Sisters series, but the fourth book that you read overall when you read it, Addicted and Calloway Sisters series, like together. And this one is Rose and Connor's book. And I honestly don't even know what to tell you about like why I love it so much. I'm such a hoe for characters that are such equals to each other, and that is Rose and Connor. They are truly equals in every way, and they respect each other so much because they know that they are like each other's equal, and that truly, especially with Connor, because he's not like a I hate everyone but you, but he truly is like, he just doesn't care about anyone else but Rose. Like he just puts her first in everything and is always there to have her back. And Rose, she doesn't need protection, but she also like craves it from Connor a little bit, and it's just so good. Their dynamic is truly unmatched. Connor is like one of my favorite heroes ever. Rose is one of my favorite heroines ever. This book just completely blew me away. It's also fun because they're filming a reality TV show at the same time that they're doing this book, which is like completely different from anything that I've ever read. Next up, an ACOTAR book had to be on here. A Court of Mist and Fury by Sarah J. Maas. So I remember when I was working in Disney, one of my friends was like, we were talking about books and talking about how much like, I really was only ever reading fantasy at the time, but she was like, you really need to try out this series. She was like, it's A Court of Thorns and Roses. It's like Beauty and the Beast inspired. And I was like, okay, yeah, whatever. Literally never ended up checking it out. And then I don't remember how I heard about ACOTAR again. Maybe it was on TikTok or something, but I was like, I ended up texting Megan and I was like, hey, I just picked up this book from my library. I think you've read it. Like, is this the one that you would recommend it? And she was like, yes, you're gonna love it, whatever. And I remember when I got that library hold in, I devoured the hell out of that book. And I was like, I need book 2 and 3, and Amazon didn't have them, so I sprinted because my Barnes & Noble only had 1 copy of each in stock, and I like ran there so quickly. Not ran, I drove. I went there as soon as I could, and I picked up these next 2, and I just devoured them. And again, this is like the perfect mesh of fantasy and romance for me. Like, this is where they meet smack dab in the middle and create magic for me personally, because this is everything that I love. It has heavy romance dynamic in it, but it also has like really cool fantasy elements. Like, obviously, yes, the fantasy world is not like the most developed that I've ever read. I truly couldn't care less about it. It's so freaking fun. This book is phenomenal. I love Feyre. I love Rhys. I love everything about their relationship in this book. Once again, I just love seeing a character struggle so hard with their mental health, see them at the bottom of the bottom, and see them like come back to life. There's something about that will literally never get old to me. It's just phenomenal. Perfection. Not a single complaint about this book. Next up, the book that has utterly wrecked me more than any other book has ever wrecked me, and that is Forbidden by Tabitha Suzuma. So I read this book for my very first Banned, Forbidden, and Taboo reading vlog. And that vlog itself, I truly look back on that video and I like cringe because it's just so, I hate that video so much. And I know that that's some people's like first video that they watch of mine, because it is like the like most popular, like when you sort, it's like my most popular video, but I hate it because I'm like whispering because I'm talking about like priests having sex while I'm still living in my parents' house. And same with this book, but I read this book for that vlog. So that vlog was special for me because it did do a lot for my channel. So I do have to like give it props for that. But that vlog also brought me this book because I read this specifically for that vlog. Otherwise, I don't know if I would have picked this up because I think I was still like scared of being judged at that point for like what I was reading, because I was still like fairly early on in my romance journey. I hadn't read a lot of taboo romance, and obviously this follows a brother and a sister. Truly, it like pushed my boundaries a lot, obviously, because it's between a brother and a sister. But there is just something about this book that it had me questioning myself and being like, am I actually rooting for these two characters to be together? Like, I shouldn't be, you know, but it blew me away that I was absolutely rooting for these two and trying to, I was like working in my mind. I'm like, okay, I was trying to problem solve for them. I'm like, how can you two be together? Let me like try to help you. Obviously I couldn't do that, and it wrecked me. Next up, one of the first student teacher books that I ever read, Dark Notes by Pam Godwin. I have just always been a hoe for the student teacher trope. Like when I watched Pretty Little Liars, I always loved Arya and Ezra. Like I have just always loved student teacher romances, and I've always loved forbidden romances. And when I read this one, I was like, because I could look back in my reading journal, but I truly think this might even have been the first ever student teacher romance that I ever read. And I was like, I need more of this, please. This one, however, though, does have animal violence in it, and that was like traumatizing to read, and it's not marked as a trigger anywhere. So just know going into this that there is animal violence and animal death in this book. It was horrifying, but I still love this book as a whole. It was my like gateway into student teacher. So, okay, next up, a contemporary YA book, The Spectacular Now by Tim Tharp. I love this movie so much, and I love this book so much. I think it's one of my favorite book to film adaptations. However, I do wish the film kept the same ending as this one. This ending, it like left me with such like just a sense of despair almost. It's not like tragic, but in a way it is. And it's just realistic, and I love realistic endings, and I think that's why sometimes like I love sad endings in books, because it's realistic. It made sense in the Divergent series that it ended how it did, and if you didn't see that coming for the entire series, then like you weren't looking into it, you know. I'm such a like about the character's journey and for them to make decisions that feel accurate to who they are as people, and that's how I felt about Sutter's ending in this book. I just love how simple it is. It's like that first love vibe. I just have like nostalgic, warm feelings like watching this movie and reading this book. But like I said, at the end of the book, it does leave me with like a sense of like emptiness in my chest, but I actually like that. I like books that pull high ranges of emotions out of you, whether it's like really high highs or really low lows. I love that. Speaking of high highs and low lows, Twist by Lucia Franco. This is the 4th book in the Off Balance series. And again, so I had read Balance for that Banned, Forbidden, Taboo reading vlog that I read Forbidden for. So again, this was like early on in my reading journey, and I remember seeing Laura from Lovely Like Laura talk about the Off Balance series in some of her videos, and I was always intrigued by them, but then they kept on getting banned, so I never got to the point where I was able to read them until finally like I sat down to do that vlog, and they had finally just been re-uploaded again. So I was able able to download them and read them, and I was obsessed. This is still, actually, I don't know if it's one of the biggest age gaps, but I'd say it's one of the most like taboo because of like the ages and like the power balance of being a coach athlete. I have never been able to replicate the feeling that I've gotten while reading this series. It truly is like the most special romance book series of all time to me. I love Rhea and Kova so much. I am so emotionally invested in both of these characters. I was so emotionally invested in Rhea's journey as a gymnast and seeing her work her way to the Olympics. There is so much that comes to a head in this book. There are so many things bubbling and brewing over the course of the 3 books that just explode in here, specifically with Rhea, but then also Rhea and Kova, and some of the ramifications of their relationship start to play out towards the end of this book that just have like a huge impact on the 5th book. There's so many scenes in here that live in my head rent-free, not even like those kind of scenes, but just like heartbreaking, raw, gritty, emotional scenes between the two of them. I get people asking me all the time, like, what are books similar to the Off Balance series? I don't know. If I ever find it, I'll tell you guys right away, but truly, I don't know. I've never found anything that lives up to this series. Next up, I have Carve the Mark by Veronica Roth. So this is the first book of a duology, YA fantasy duology. So this book specifically, it wasn't that I wasn't excited to read it, but however, I only pre-ordered it because if you pre-ordered it, you got a Divergent epilogue. And I was like, I need that epilogue. And I ended up hating that epilogue and wishing that I had never even read that. But then I was like, well, I have this book, so I might as well read it. So I went into this with no expectations. I didn't know what it was about whatsoever, and I freaking loved it. Really liked the world building of it. I loved our 2 characters. It's true like enemies to lovers, and it's like captor-captive, and obviously now in my romance journey, I love reading captor-captive, and just really like seeing these 2 people who are always trying to be manipulated by the people around them, and that they should hate each other and everything that like the other person represents, but yet they're like the only people that they can kind of count on, rely on, love, and respect. So good. Next up, Twist Emotions by Cora Riley, the 2nd book in the Kimura Chronicles. When do you like my little sticky tab? This scene in particular is when Nino serves very much touch her and I'll kill you energy. So this one is an arranged marriage mafia romance book. The writing of Nino's character, because Nino is it like a psychopath? Like he doesn't feel emotions. And it comes through so clearly with the writing, but yet you still get a good sense of character. Like I found in other books where like characters are psychopaths or like they don't have emotions that I can't, like I feel like such a disconnect between characters because sometimes I don't feel like they're written the best. But Nino in here, I loved seeing him start to have some feelings towards Kiara and also be like confused on why he is and just like how to deal with that. So good. I loved Kiara's journey. It's very dark, like what she went through, and her past is dark, and seeing her work through that with Nino and him being willing to be patient with her and work through it. And while he can't understand the emotional impact that those things have had on her and her life, that he still is willing to try to understand, even though there's like really no way that he can, but he's willing to do it because he cares for her and sees her struggling and doesn't like that. It's so beautiful. Next up, Always Been You by QB Tyler. There's just nothing that I love more than a taboo, age gap, forbidden romance, and that is basically all of what QB Tyler writes. All of her books I feel like can fall under either taboo, forbidden, or age gap romances, and she does it so well. Like no one does a taboo, forbidden romance like QB does. And this one particularly started off as a novella, and I was blown away by the novella, and I never liked novellas. Or it's not like I never liked them, but they're just never really my favorite. But this one, I was completely blown away by it. So then when she expanded into a full book, I was like, oh my god, I am pumped for that, and this book just delivered. It's adopted siblings, it's hot, it's forbidden, it's just everything that I love in a romance nowadays. Like this is one of the most recent examples that I have on here of books that it's just like, I want all of my books to give me this energy. Next up, I got a fan fiction, Manacle by Senlin Yu. So this is a Harry Potter Hermione fan fiction. It's like Harry Potter meets Handmaid's Tale. And it's like, what if Voldemort would have won the war? And so now like Voldemort's people are in charge, and Hermione is the last living member of the order. So Voldemort gives her to Draco to be his handmaiden. and also for Draco to kind of like unlock these memories that she has like locked up in her brain. I don't care about Harry Potter in the slightest. I was just convinced to pick this up by my two friends, Claudia and Amanda. They both read it and loved it, and they were like, you have to give it a shot. And I was like, you know what, fine, I'll give it a shot. And I'm so glad that I did. It is thick. It is a journey. So heavy. It's so heartbreaking. I have never stopped thinking about this since I read it back in January, and it still pops into my head on the regular. Like, truly, this is one of the most masterful things I've ever read. Next up, Twisted Love by Anna Huang. So I read this last year, and I was kind of in a slump when I had read this. I had been reading like a lot. I had been reading like solid books, but not one that like blew me away and gave me that kind of like feeling that I've gotten with some of these books back here. And this one gave me that same feeling. It's a brother's best friend, billionaire, grumpy sunshine romance. And here's the thing. I've always, obviously, as I've said, I love villains. I love morally gray characters, as showcased behind me. But one thing that I really realized in this that I particularly love is icy rage and like icy men. And Alex delivers on the ice rage, and he delivers on the Iceman like exterior, but then only has like a heart for her and like eyes for her. Oh my God. And the groveling in this, I love groveling. And once again, I feel like a lot of times we don't get enough groveling, but Alex did his fair share of groveling. And I love the whole Twisted series, but Twisted Love, even though like I think Twisted Hate is my favorite book out of them all, it still didn't give me like that same kind of like feeling that those other books gave and that this one gave me. Okay, next up, another book that I can just, this is like truly where my love of reading started, and that was with the Hunger Games series back when I was in middle school, but Catching Fire was my favorite book out of that whole series and still is my favorite book. I don't know how many times I've reread this series, but I did reread these a couple years ago again, and once again, Catching Fire was my favorite. It's also the best movie out of them all. That movie is quite literally perfection. That is the best book to movie adaptation I've ever seen in my entire life. And the fact that this book gives like the similar concept of the first book, but it never once feels like you're repeating things or like reading the same book over again. Masterful. I love Katniss Everdeen. Again, one of my like favorite heroines that I always idolized growing up. Peeta is the definition of friends to lovers. I love him. I was never Team Gale, and if you are Team Gale, no. Okay, we're down to our last two. It Ends With Us by Colleen Hoover. I remember I was like done with Colleen Hoover before I had read this book. I had obviously seen all of the hype about her a couple of years ago and seen so many people talk about her books, and I had read Hopeless and Confess, and I did not like either of those. And I was like, I don't understand. I truly don't get it. But I was like, you know what? She's just not the author for me. But then I was convinced to read It Ends With Us. I think after watching, obviously like Jess is a huge fan of this book, so it was probably after watching her multiple times talk about it that I was like, fine, I will give Colleen Hoover one more chance with It Ends With Us. And when I started this book, I remember it was like on like it was on a Sunday because my dad was watching football, and I was like upstairs in the living room reading this while I was up there. And I remember like being in shock when what happens in this, and truly being like, I wish that I could change the words on the page right now to make that not have just happened. I'm like, that couldn't have just happened. It couldn't have, and it did. And I just loved seeing Lily's journey on this. It gave me like an entirely new perspective on women going through domestic violence situations. Because like society from the outside, they always look at a woman in this kind of situation and they're like, why didn't they leave? Why didn't they do this? Why didn't they do that? And it's like, why are we blaming or like asking questions of the victim of like, why didn't they do more? And be like, hey, why is this person being abusive instead, and like holding them accountable? It was completely different than anything that I'd ever read before. Now I've read like other books with similar kind of situations, but this was the first one that I had ever read like that. And it was also the reason why I've read more Colleen Hoover books, because I just loved this one so much. And it's one that I've reread a couple times now, and still every single time that I read it, I love it just as much. Okay, last but not least, another one that I don't get to talk about a lot because it never really fits into videos, and that is The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. Once again, I was just blown away by the, like, I don't want to say simplicity because this book isn't simple in any way, but I do just think it's definitely a slower book, and it's definitely character driven. This book, again, it just got me in my feels. It was beautifully done. It's very like artistic, I feel like. I don't know. I definitely get why people don't like this book because it is slow at times, and I do think that it is like a little bit flowery, but that's like what I love about it. And once again, it doesn't have like a super happy ending, which again, always I'm kind of a sucker for. I never get to talk about this book, but I do truly love it a lot. So anyways, that is just 26 random books that I love that I just wanted to highlight and talk about today. So anyways, because my uploading schedule was a little different this week with not doing like Tuesday, Friday and doing like a Wednesday video, I might have another one up on Saturday. That is it for today's video. Thank you for sticking with me. I know this wasn't like a rec video or really anything where I was like actively trying to give you guys books. So thanks for sticking with me if you did till the end here. So anyways, that's it for today and I will see you when I see ya.